Hey everyone, welcome to a Week 7 recap edition of the West Coast Best Coast Football Show. What a weekend of college football. Man, this was awesome. For West Coast football, a lot of great storylines. There were some unfortunate losses in the week of college football, but we need to start with what I want to call the main event. Oregon and Ohio State meet Saturday night in one of the games of the year. This was just an outstanding football game. Oregon wins 32-31. They get a late field goal. This was back and forth all over the place. Oregon was chasing points after they missed an extra point. But this was an awesome game. It comes down to the final play, and Ohio State, controversial penalty on Jeremiah Smith, the freshman receiver, for pushing off. It leads to some confusion with the clock, and then Will Howard tries to get a couple of yards and call a timeout, and the clock ran out. And something was pointed out on the internet that it looks like Oregon intentionally took a penalty for having an extra guy on the field to waste 4 seconds, which is kind of brilliant, to be honest with you. But the story in this game really is Dan Lanning finally wins a big game against a ranked opponent, and this was a statement win. This was the win that needed to happen for Oregon in the Big Ten for a West Coast team to win. You know, granted, it was at Autzen, but still, you beat an Ohio State team that spent so much money on NIL, brought in so many transfers, brought in this all-star team, and you hung with them blow for blow, and ultimately you win. Yes, it was by circumstance at the end of the game. Got some calls to go your way. I normally like the referees to kind of, swallow the whistle at the end of the game and let the players play. But it did look like Jeremiah Smith absolutely pushed off on I don't know who it was for Oregon, but it looked like a push off. And it's just like, you hate to see it happen in that, but Ohio State had their opportunities to potentially, get some more points in this game. So it's going to be another, blemish on Ryan Day in terms of how Ohio State fans view him. But really what it's going to come down to is what happens against the team up north. But specifically in relation to this show, back to Oregon. First of all, Dylan Gabriel was awesome in this game. He had 341 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 32 yards rushing. He also had a rushing touchdown. Evan Stewart was great in this game, 149 yards receiving and a TD. Jordan James, 115 yards rushing and a TD. They did lose Trayshawn Holden to really one of the more despicable things I've ever seen in a football game. Guy going up for a pass and then just walking back, spits in a dude's face and gets thrown out of the game. So Oregon had some stuff that went on in this game against them that, they had to fight through. Tez Johnson was good in this game for Oregon. But really what this comes back to is Oregon, for the first time under Dan Lanning, finally wins one of these games that are, really a defining program type game where you beat a ranked opponent inside the top 10. In this case, a top 3 matchup, really to define your season early on in the Big Ten, your first season, and your first really massive game of Big Ten football. All due respect to Michigan State and the other teams that they've played so far this year, there's nothing like playing Ohio State. And this was built up to be one of the great games of the season. It lived up to the hype. Like I said, this really what this comes down to is this was a statement win for this Oregon program. And Dan Lanning is one of the best coaches in college football. You could see that clear as day for as young as he is. But he's come up short in these matchups. He's had 3 losses against a ranked Washington team in the last couple of seasons, and a lot of them were self-inflicted where they could have won each and every one of those games. But when it came down to this, all of the right decisions were made, and they end up getting the field goal at the end. Yes, they had a pass interference call benefit them, but they were able to be on the right side of history, and that means a lot to this program. For right now, Oregon has got to be, right up there with Texas. Texas is the clear, in a way, number 1 team right now, but I absolutely think, based off winning a slugfest like this, I definitely think Oregon is one of the best teams in the country, and Dan Lanning is one of the best coaches in the country. if they could compete with Texas. We'll see if that happens, and we'll see how the rest of the season goes, because this Big Ten season is going to get weird. Oregon's got to go to Purdue next week, and Purdue actually almost won a game against Illinois. We're not going to talk about the Big Ten so much in relation to the other Big Ten teams not associated on the West Coast. But yeah, this was as advertised. Dan Lanning, congratulations to them. Dylan Gabriel, this is the reason why he brought him there, to win them big games like this, and lo and behold, they win, and they're moving on up the standings. They're 6-0 now, and now you're really in the driver's seat, really in the Big Ten, because now it's down to them. Indiana is on a bye, and then let's get to the other big West Coast versus East Coast matchup, perennial power in the Big Ten versus new West Coast newcomer. Penn State taking on USC at the Coliseum. This was an awesome game too. It didn't look like that way early on. It looked like USC was gonna, put their foot down. They went up 20-6 in this game. And then Penn State comes back on the back of Drew Aller, who threw for almost 400 yards. He did have 3 interceptions but 2 touchdowns. And one of the best performances of the season, Tyler Warren, the tight end, wearing number 44 for Penn State, goes 17 catches for 224 yards and a touchdown. Holy shit, what a performance from the Penn State tight end. Miller Moss was fine in this game, 220 through the air, 2 TDs. Woody Marks had a nice game on the ground. And, USC, at the end of this game, some clock mismanagement. They get into territory. They basically let about a whole minute run off the clock, and then they had 20 seconds left, and they don't get a chance to kick a game-winning field goal, so they let it go to overtime effectively, and then they miss a field goal in overtime, and then Penn State is able to kick the game-winning field goal and win 33-30 in overtime. This is usually a game that Penn State loses. So James Franklin, going across the country, gets a win for the Nittany Lions. They're undefeated, and don't look now, Penn State is in really good shape to make the playoff. But in terms of USC, holy crap, what a bunch of missed opportunities for this team. They missed an opportunity against Michigan. They blew that game because of poor execution offensively and some bad play calling. They blew the game against Minnesota because they couldn't execute. And now they blow this game with some horrendous clock mismanagement. I'm starting to get tired of all of these excuses from Lincoln Riley, because you're up 20-6 at home against a top 5 team, and all we're going to hear from Lincoln Riley is, oh, hey, we're a few plays away from being 6-0. Guess what? You're not. You lost on the road to Michigan. You lost on the road inexcusably to Minnesota, and you lose this game to Penn State. Your season's effectively over. You're 3-3 on the season. A once promising season looks completely lost. And since that massive season to start, they're an average. USC is an average football program. I think it's fair now to start really criticizing Lincoln Riley, because we gave them the benefit of the doubt after last season because their defense was bad. They had a convenient scapegoat in Alex Grinch. What's the excuse now? What's the excuse now? Like, Michigan didn't throw for 50 yards passing on the road. Minnesota couldn't really do much. And on the strength of a QB sneak, controversial or not, you lose that game. And then this, at home, up 14 against a top 5 team, you look like you're dominating them, and then you can't finish the game. You have the game in your hands, and you let all of this time tick off, and it's just, we're already in year 3, and we're already having this conversation about Lincoln Riley. I don't think this is going to get better. I really don't. I think LSU was a great win for this program, but I think we got ahead, really out in front of this whole thing. And just to see the manner in which they've lost their 3 games, that comes down to coaching. When you're losing games that close, and it goes to show you that maybe Lincoln Riley, maybe we have this different person, maybe we have the wrong perception about him, because they lost a ton of games because of bad defense last year. This season, it's on coaching. as far as I'm concerned. You cannot lose the 3 games they have, and specifically this one. So USC, man, I did not have them the way they started the season, becoming a 500 team and really having no hope in hell of even contending this year. And now they got to worry about trying to make a bowl. I think they should still be fine. They're talented enough to do that, but Big Ten is tough, man. There's no gimmies, as you can see. They've yet to win on the road. So, and they still have Notre Dame on their schedule as well. Granted, they're going to get Notre Dame at the Coliseum, but Notre Dame has been playing really good football. So those are the 2 main games that we needed to talk about on here. Let's talk about the rest of the West Coast. We'll also include Boise State into this equation as well. We got to talk about what happened on Friday night, because what a win for Kenny Dillingham and Arizona State. They beat Utah 27-19 on Friday night. I guess we could call it Big 12 after dark. Cam Rising does return but throws 3 interceptions. Mekhi Bernard had a really awesome game running the football, but Utah could not score. And Arizona State did just enough. Cam Scatterboot was fantastic in this game. Almost 200 yards of total offense. He had 158 rushing and 2 touchdowns. Caleb McCullough had 2 INTs for the Arizona State defense. Sam Levitt, 154 yards passing and a touchdown. But, man, Kenny Dillingham, man, this guy's younger than me, and he's got the Arizona State Sun Devils at 5-1. Don't look now. They're 5-1. They're firmly in the mix to be in contention in the Big 12. I don't know how serious you want to take them, but they did beat the preseason pick to win the Big 12 in Utah. And mind you, Arizona State was picked dead last out of 16 teams in the Big 12, and they've won 5 games this year. That's 2 more than they won all of last year. They're 1 win away from bowl eligibility. That is an unbelievable achievement for this Arizona State program to get this win against a Utah at home in that spot. Yes, Cam Rising was not great and he was coming off of an injury, but still, this is a remarkable story. And if not for Indiana, I think we would be talking a lot more about Arizona State, because this is really incredible what they've been able to do in the first 6 games of the season. And we'll see where it goes the rest of the way in the Big 12, because it's wide the F open. Iowa State and BYU are the 2 teams at the top of the conference. But I'm just amazed. And then you see the enthusiasm from Kenny Dillingham in the celebration after the game when the fans stormed the field. That's what college football is all about. So awesome job by Kenny Dillingham and Arizona State to get the win 27-19 over Utah. Big time stuff there. Washington, I thought we had figured out Washington. They go to Iowa on the big noon kickoff, and they get their asses kicked. 40-16 by Iowa. Caleb Johnson, 3 total touchdowns. Washington gives up 166 yards rushing to him, over 200 yards on the ground. Will Rogers, decent game, 195 yards and a touchdown. Jonah Coleman only had 9 carries and 80 yards. But Washington gets destroyed. This was the first real humbling game for Washington. They had really, kind of beaten themselves in the game against Washington State. And then, losing at Rutgers. But this was just a butt kicking. And Iowa really put their foot down in this game. Caleb Johnson, honestly, if you want to talk about football players just, outside of the West Coast, he's one of the best in the country. He's been awesome this season for Iowa. But Washington, man, that was kind of a reality check for them that, hey, they're kind of middle of the road or a lower tier in the Big Ten. They're not going to be very good this year because like I said, Iowa just got their butts kicked by Ohio State, and you go up there and you lose by three scores. Like that's just not going to get it done. So Washington, Jetfish, they got a long way to go. I think we kind of learned a little bit about them. So speaking of learning about stuff, since the Syracuse win, Stanford is just getting absolutely destroyed. They go to Stanford and get run out of the building 49-7. They did take a 7-0 lead, which I think should count for something, but they only have 200 yards of total offense in this game. Riley Leonard has 3 touchdowns. Stanford is not very good. I've said this before. I'll say this again. I really like Troy Taylor, but they're going to have a really hard time competing against the better teams in the country. Yes, congratulations. You beat Syracuse. Syracuse is okay. They're not amazing. They're kind of overachieved this season, but when you go on the road and play a team like Notre Dame, or when you play a team like Virginia Tech in your own house, or you go to Clemson, which has basically been their last 3 games, you're going to get your butt kicked. They lose 49-7. So Stanford, what we already knew, they're not very good. Cal has been so disappointing for so many different reasons, for so many other different reasons for what Stanford is doing. Cal could have very easily be undefeated at this point. But 3 head-scratching losses. They had the loss last week against Miami where they were just running Miami off the field, and then they blow up an enormous lead in that game. They lose at Florida State where they couldn't score a touchdown, and they missed a bunch of field goals. And in this game against an undefeated Pitt team going across the country, and they actually played well enough to win this game too. They lose 17-15. Ryan Coe, their kicker, misses a 40-yard field goal with an opportunity to take the lead. They get the ball back. They have an opportunity to get down there and win it again, and they can't get it done. They got 2 interceptions off Eli Holstein. Like, they did a lot of things right. Fernando Mendoza was good in this game. Jack Andrews, 7 for 119. Fernando Mendoza, like I said, 272 and a touchdown. They gave up a big play to Desmond Reed, but you lose by 2, man, and you had a field goal to potentially tie the game. It's just been a bunch of missed opportunities for Cal this season, and it's really frustrating because I really thought that this team could really make some noise and be a very interesting team. And you saw it. They almost beat Miami. They almost beat Pitt. But it's been too many almost this season. It's a season almost similar in some ways to what's going on with USC. And, I mean, it's just, when sometimes it's coaching, sometimes it's players not executing, and when you're missing field goals and you're making gaffes and you're giving up leads. I like Justin Wilcox, man, but this is really hard to see that this team could very easily be undefeated as well, like USC. But yeah, this was a gut punch for the Bears, man. That really stunk for them to fall on the road at Pitt. But man, Pitt's undefeated. They're one of the surprises in all of college football as well. Arizona, I think we kind of overrated them a little bit. It's sad because I really like a lot of the pieces there. I like Brent Brennan. But they go to BYU, another great surprise in the country, and they get stomped by the Cougs. Noah Fafita, 3 interceptions. I mean, Teteroa McMillan, usual self, 5 for 78. But they just couldn't stop BYU. Jake Retzlaff, 218 yards, 2 TDs. BYU wins 41-19. BYU's really good. This is their best start to a season since the Zach Wilson years. And in 2020, they weren't playing anybody. They're playing some teams, man. BYU has played some real teams so far. So that's an interesting story for another, even though they are a West Coast team, but they've never been associated with the Pac-12. But man, like I said, Arizona has kind of been humbled. Obviously, the loss to Texas Tech, not great, and then losing to BYU. But they do have the win over Utah, which was a big time win for them. But yeah, and then obviously Arizona's lost to Kansas State as well. So Arizona's season, which was thought to be somewhat promising, is kind of effectively over too. But I think we maybe kind of jumped to some conclusions a little bit about them. New coach, I know some of the same pieces are there, but you jump into a new conference and then you obviously get hammered by a couple teams that are, and it lowers you in the pecking order. And Arizona is kind of a disappointment in this season. Really disappointing there. Washington State coming off the bye beats Fresno State 25-17. John Mateer, kind of pedestrian, 172 yards passing, 46 yards rushing. He had a touchdown. The turning point in this game, Ethan O'Connor gets a pick 6 with under 7 minutes to go, and Washington State's able to hold on at Fresno State and win 25-17. So the Cougs are now 5-1. They rebound nicely off of the win over of the loss against Boise State heading into the bye. I mean, a lot of people are getting clobbered by Boise State. Oregon State. I think maybe I kind of jumped to some conclusions about this team. They lose at Nevada. Giovanni McCoy, their quarterback, throws for almost 350 yards, but he has 4 interceptions. Anthony Hankerson was awesome in this game. 154 rushing, 3 TDs. Trent Walker, 96 yards receiving and a touchdown. Story in the game, Oregon State could not stop the run. Nevada runs for 353 yards. Savion Red, 137 yards and 4 touchdowns. Brendan Lewis, former Pac-12 quarterback at Colorado, runs for a 151 and a TD. And yeah, Nevada wins 42-37. Oregon State, an opportunity for them to get to 5-1, and they kind of get knocked back down to reality a little bit here. We'll see how they're able to rebound. I've really been impressed with what Trent Bray's been able to do in a really difficult situation. But this was kind of an eye-opener. Like I said, you get 4 turnovers from the quarterback, 4 interceptions, and then you give up 350 yards rushing. You're not going to win a lot of those games. So Oregon State falls there. UCLA, I've made no secrets about this. I really I don't have a lot of optimism about this team. They lose at home to Minnesota, and they were in this game, and they were leading. And then Darius Taylor scores with under 30 seconds to go in this game. Max Brosmer, 193 yards and 2 touchdowns. Ethan Garber's 3 interceptions in this game. J. Michael Sturdivant had a really good game for UCLA, 107 yards receiving and a touchdown. But again, these late game things, I mean, they haven't really been in these situations. This is where I have concerns about Deshaun Foster. And UCLA's 1-5 now, and they're going to be playing even the middle of the road teams are going to beat them. And Minnesota is kind of a middle of the road team, but they play their asses off. And don't look down. Minnesota beat both Southern California teams. Good for them. Good for PJ Fleck. Row the damn boat, man. Like, that was good for Minnesota, man, on a separate note, because they got screwed against Michigan a couple weeks ago. But they get the win at the Rose Bowl. And, UCLA, I really think, and I hate this because I really like Deshaun Foster in terms of, I liked him as a player. He's beloved as a person and, as a position coach, but he's just out of place as a head coach. They're just not being put in positions to win games. I think he's going to be one and done at UCLA, unfortunately, because this was just an unusual circumstance when your head coach leaves to be the offensive coordinator at a better program. What other circumstance are you ever going to see that? And then in February, you're having to figure out who your head coach is. So, and we get to the last couple games here on the show. Kansas State comes back to beat Colorado. Colorado actually took the lead in this game. Avery Johnson threw an interception, and Shedeur Sanders throws a touchdown to give Colorado the lead. Shedeur Sanders only had 6 incompletions in this game, 34 for 40, 388 yards, 3 touchdowns. I may not like this kid. I may think he's kind of a spoiled brat, but damn is he fucking talented. He is fucking talented, and he's going to be a great quarterback at the next level. It's easy to see that his father is a former NFL player. This guy has been really awesome. But Avery Johnson comes back, throws a touchdown to Jace Brown, who had 2 touchdowns in this game with 121 yards receiving. Dylan Edwards, revenge game, former Colorado. He transferred to Kansas State. He has a rushing touchdown. DJ Giddens was unreal in this game, 182 yards rushing. Like I mentioned, Shedeur had a really good game. Avery Johnson, 2 TD passes. Amarian Miller, 145 yards receiving. But Kansas State gets the win 31-28. Colorado had the ball, 4th and 5, and they decided to throw a pass 25, 30 yards down the field. What are you doing, Pat Shurmur? What are we doing? Colorado had a chance to win this game. And we'll see if this, I still think they're better than I expected them to be. But it's going to be interesting to see now moving forward in the Big 12, now that they have another loss in conference, and now that they're 4-2. How is this team going to respond? Because they can still get to a bowl game, and that would be an accomplishment for them. But I think really what this says about Colorado is that if they would have won this game, there was a real opportunity for them to potentially, contend in the Big 12 and make it to the playoff. Now you've got a loss. You're now behind a couple of teams. Like you're tied with Arizona State. That'll be interesting in itself to see how Arizona State and Colorado play against each other in this new Big 12. But you're also behind BYU, and you're behind BYU, and you're behind Iowa State in the Big 12. So. This was a missed opportunity for Colorado, especially after taking the lead. A thrilling game, and Kansas State's a really good team. They had them at home, and they didn't get the job done. So it'll be interesting to see how I still think they're good, but this was one of those missed opportunities if you're going to be a really good team and potentially contend and be in the college football playoff discussion, you have to win that game, and they don't. And then we get to Boise State taking on Hawaii. really what this is all about is Ashton Jeanty. I mean, it wasn't the same type of Ashton Jeanty performance, but he still ran for 200 yards. I mean, 31 carries, 210 yards. He had 237 yards total, 2 total touchdowns. This kid's unreal, man. By the way, in the Colorado game against Kansas State, Travis Hunter did not play for a large chunk of this game. He left the game injured. So does Dillon Gabriel now, with that big win against Ohio State, now vault himself into the discussion for the Heisman Trophy? Ashton Jeanty's not going to slow down, people. Like another 200-yard game, and yeah, he had 31 carries, but still, that's like 6 or 7 yards a carry, man. Like, this guy is doing unheard of things. Like, I think he's up to almost 1,300 yards rushing and like 17 touchdowns, something like that. It's unbelievable what this kid is doing. I hope we really don't dismiss just because he's at Boise State and he was playing at 11:15 Eastern time to start this game against Hawaii. Still, people need to recognize that this kid is the best player in college football. And Boise State is a real team. Unless they slip up, man, like they're in really good position to make the college football playoff as the Group of 5 qualifier. And if that happens and Ashton Jeanty keeps putting up the numbers like this, he's going to win the Heisman Trophy. Like I said, you could try to give it to Dillon Gabriel at this point, and I would understand why, because Oregon's more nationally well known. But at the same time, Dillon Gabriel and Ashton Jeanty played head-to-head. Yes, Oregon won that game, but who was the best player on the field in that game? Ask yourself that question. It was Ashton Jeanty. No question about it. All right, so that is Week 7. We'll be back later in the week for a Week 8 look-ahead. It'll be very interesting. I'm going to have to really think long and hard about my rankings after number 1, because number 1 is clearly Oregon. Beyond that, I have no freaking idea what I'm going to do with the rest of these rankings, because a bunch of losses. USC lost, Utah lost, Colorado lost, Washington lost, Arizona lost, Oregon State lost, Cal lost, Stanford lost, UCLA lost. There were some great games, but not a lot of positives for some of the West Coast teams in the former Pac-12. But hopefully there'll be more optimism later in the season. And Oregon's going to, at minimum, be number 2 in the country. I don't think they'll jump Texas, but they're going to be number 2 in the country. What a win for them. What the game lived up to the hype. Really awesome stuff. And, it'll be fun discussion to see what goes on at USC now that they are a 500 football team and blowing another game like they did. So that's the West Coast Best Coast Football Show. Hit the subscribe button below on this video. Like, share, and subscribe on the channel. OT Mike Sports, Off the Mic 28 on Twitter if you want to follow me or the channel. Thanks so much for watching. I will talk to you guys very, very soon. Bye-bye.